Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you the extra nuggets and tidbits to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. We are going to turn first of all to an article in War on the Rocks by Neil Hauer, Ukraine's War of Narratives. This has been discussed a number of times in different places, actually. I've been meaning to talk about this for some time. So this is kind of reminding us of what's taken place in the war, but looking at different phases of the war and how the narrative has swung like a pendulum from one side to the other. And I want to add a little bit of analysis to that at the end. But I read this thinking, oh my goodness, that's exactly what's happened. It's been up, down, up, down, up, down. And it's really kind of almost... I don't know. There's a pattern to this that seems quite predictive. Like we can imagine that's going to happen again in the same way that it happened the last time. So I'll explain this as we go. He. Not at the beginning of the article, but at some way down it, he says, but one of the key lessons from watching this war and the way that it's covered in the media is that perceptions can be fickle. Throughout 22 months of this conflict, the ironclad conventional wisdom regarding the war's present state and near future has repeatedly been shattered. By my own count, there have been no less than 7 major narrative periods of this war, each of which has ended with the script flipping almost entirely. Both Ukraine and Russia have regularly been seen as the conflict's inevitable victor, only to fall back down to earth when the expectations created failed to live up to reality. The length of each cycle seems to have expanded as the war itself has gone on, and dramatic swings of battlefield fortune have become less common. But the characteristics of each new paradigm have fundamentally remained much the same, and there is every reason to expect more to come. In other words, what we've seen now is a good predictor of what we're going to see going forward in this up and down interpretation of events. Right. The first major narrative cycle preceded the war itself. In the run-up to the Russian invasion, Russian forces were widely expected to crush Ukraine's conventional troops in the field. While the potential scope of this initial victory was much debated, there was a broad sense that Russia's reformed and far better equipped military would triumph in open battle with Ukrainian forces before proceeding to a costly occupation period. They're expecting to have a huge advantage in terms of long-range missile capabilities. They were going to use a shock and awe campaign that would decimate the Ukrainian military. So lots of people were saying it was going to take 3 days for the Ukrainians to capitulate, for Russia to win. In fact, they had packed military vehicles with parade uniforms because they're expecting to just overrun the Ukrainians, do parades in Kiev with their Rodzgvardia, their kind of riot police playing quite a major role, so not really thinking about a major military ground force style invasion, but one that will quickly switch the government to a puppet government for the Russians. So that's why I always say this was never intended to be a war. It was designed to be a special military operation, and within 2 days it had failed. But the point was the preceding phase, this first initial phase, which should have, if they had planned for a war, involved suppression of enemy air defences and destruction of enemy air defences for like 6 weeks worth of bombing from planes. So it didn't, just a few days of that and then go in. But that initial phase was met very pessimistically by the media looking in from the outside. So everyone's like, oh my goodness, right, okay, this is going to be an absolute massacre. Zelensky, do you need to lift out of there? We'll save you. And he's like, no, I'm staying. And everyone's like, oh, that's nuts. And then, as it goes on to say, in the event, Ukraine did, of course, hold out. Russia's poorly planned and executed initial invasion floundered, stalling well short of most of its objectives within days and failing to even surround, let alone take Kyiv by early April. Russian forces had withdrawn entirely from northern Ukraine. Images of Russian military incompetence were everywhere, most famously in videos of Russian tanks and other heavy ordnance abandoned and towed off by Ukrainian farmers. Remember that? Seems such a long time ago, those memes of farmers, tractors pulling tanks. Some observers use this to draw sweeping conclusions. The idea that Russia was a state whose military had credibly threatened Europe and NATO countries when it couldn't even seize Kharkiv, a city 15 kilometers from its borders, now felt ludicrous. Now the pendulum had swung to, oh my God, Russia are absolutely rubbish. Ukraine can do this. So then you had this euphoria, and as he goes on to say, as a euphoria of the unexpected victories in a war war's opening stages faded, another phase of the war and its perception set in. So now we're moving to like a third phase. Having withdrawn its brigades from northern Ukraine in fairly good order, Moscow now refocuses its efforts entirely on Ukraine's eastern Donbass region. Here, Russia would be able to deploy its massive advantage in artillery fires to grind down the Ukrainian army, as demonstrated in its ability to annihilate the town of Popasna before seizing it on May the 7th. So if you remember, it was like, oh, now this is all really not looking good. Popasna was taken when they thought it was going to hold out. You know, you had Severodonetsk, you had all these places, you know, that fell to the Russians. Soldiers, he says, talked about being outgunned and outmanned by as much as 10-1 and feeling abandoned by leadership in Kyiv. Again, that's a cyclical thing, isn't it? As Russia's enormous Soviet-era military stockpile fueled its grinding, relentless artillery-heavy assaults for months, another perception of the war gained popularity. Russia was simply too large and too resilient to lose this war, its material advantages making any talk of Ukrainian victory implausible. Russia's progress could only be slowed and not stopped, and Western arms for Ukraine would only prolong the inevitable and increased suffering, as Moscow's troops captured the twin cities of Lysychansk and Severodonetsk. So the analysis I wanted to give here is that, and we're going to see this going on, but I'm going to interrupt now to say, right, we started with, oh my God, Russia are going to absolutely win, to, oh my God, no, they're not going to win, Ukraine could do this, to, oh yeah, Russia are going to win, to, oh my God, no, they're not, to, oh yeah, Russia are going to win. But what's interesting is that each time you have the Russia are going to win, it looks better for Ukraine. So we might be in a phase at the moment where we're like, oh, it's really tough and there's lots of like exhaustion and morale issues and mobilization issues and people starting to get worried about Zelensky, etc., all this stuff. But actually, Ukraine are in a better position now than they ever were. Likewise, at this point of looking bad for Ukraine, they're actually in a better position than people were thinking at the beginning. So actually at the beginning, everyone's like, Ukraine are going to be done in 3 days. The next down point for Ukraine is like, okay, we don't know how long it's going to take, but Ukraine are going to get done. They're never going to be able to cope with this, right? And then we had, so it actually, on each trough, peaks and troughs, at each trough for Ukraine, the trough is further up than the previous trough. It's like, oh, you're like, right, it's really bad, 3 days. Oh, Ukraine have done really well. Oh, really bad, but not as bad as thinking it's going to be over in 3 days, but they're going to grind it out. And actually, probably what's happening is it's moving, both peaks and troughs are moving towards like a much shallower wavelength, a much shorter, that's wavelength, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? So I think it's an interesting observation to think that actually each time, certainly with the troughs, each subsequent trough is less doomy than the other one. But we kind of forget the ones previously, so we get all doomy again. But actually it's not as doomy as it was before. So let's carry on this narrative then. The next shift was perhaps just as drastic. On September 6th, 2022, Ukrainian forces launched a surprise offensive on Russian positions east of the city of Kharkiv. Finding them undermanned and ill-coordinated, Ukrainian troops quickly punched through Russian lines into rear areas, leading to a total rout that saw Ukrainian forces liberate nearly the entirety of Russian-held Kharkiv Oblast within days. The revelations of Russia's manpower issues, with some units operating at less than 30% of their intended strength, were followed by chaotic partial mobilization ordered by Russian President Vladimir Putin. So then it was like panic by the Russians as they're like, oh my goodness, the Ukrainians have done us. So then he called for mobilization. There were protests against mobilization. We kind of forget that. There was a mass exodus of Russians fleeing the country to get out of being mobilized. We've kind of forgotten that now. And that created a sense that Russia was on the verge of collapse, either on the battlefield or internally. Then we had the liberation of Kherson, the only Ukrainian provincial capital that had been captured. So some analysts then, you're thinking now you're at the peak, thinking that the war would be over by Christmas. Others talked of at least reaching the Crimean Peninsula within a few months. The convergence of these factors was intoxicating on social media and felt like it could not be reversed. This too did not last. Now it was Ukraine's turn to fall short of supplies, with ammunition in particular running down. Hopes of a Ukrainian winter offensive to seize the key Donbass junction town of Crimea did not materialize, as Ukrainian forces ran low on artillery shells. We heard this before, yes, peaks and troughs, same pattern. Mobilized Russian conscripts began to reach a battlefield in large numbers, stymieing the Ukrainian advance and plugging holes in Russian lines. It was at this time that the single longest and deadliest battle of the entire war played out, the siege of Bakhmut. So remember, we had those endless waves of convicts, the Storm Z units, the grinding out of that victory for Russia, and everyone thinking, "Oh, woe is Ukraine," but yet again, at that point, it wasn't as bad as people were feeling at the previous low, and it certainly wasn't as bad as thinking they're going to lose it in 3 days. I mean, the fact that it took over a year to take Bakhmut is a far cry from losing the country in 3 days to an invading force, right? So we've got to remember that each trough is not as low as the previous one. During the desperate defense of Bakhmut, Ukraine and its Western partners were not idle. They had instead spent the interim training and equipping a number of new brigades that were to use Western-supplied main battle tanks and armoured vehicles in a sweeping counteroffensive that would liberate large swathes of territory. Ukrainian officials did not shy away from buoying expectations to lofty heights. You had Podolyak, one of Zelensky's top advisors, stating in April that Ukraine would, quote, return and liberate Crimea within 5 to 7 months. You had Budanov, you had General Ben Hodges, all these people saying, yeah, it'll be fine. Those dragon's teeth are not going to be a problem. You can use bulldozers to get over that, yada, yada, yada. And then you had this kind of high of like, okay, the counteroffensive Ukraine are going to win this thing. They're going to win this thing. It's going to be brilliant. And then, of course, the counteroffensive didn't succeed because the fortifications were we talked about this a million times. Fortifications were much denser. The minefields were incredibly dense. You had attack helicopters being used with impunity. You had ATGM crews and artillery being used hugely, like hammering the Ukrainians attacking. You had Shahid drones still active and so on and so forth. Logistics still working, and the Ukrainians didn't have the equipment that they wanted for that attack. So the Abrams didn't come till the end of the counteroffensive. They didn't get ATACMS till after, and when they did get them, they took out 2 air bases in one night. You know, had they had all the equipment at the beginning of the counteroffensive, could that have been different? All the ATACMS that they needed, could that have been different? So then it was like, oh no, woe is us. So then you get to the end of the counteroffensive, which is where we're at now, and everyone's like, oh, you know, Russia are going to do X, Y, and Z. But of course, right now, Ukraine are in a better position than they've ever been. They've got better equipment than they've ever had. They've got, I mean, goodness me, if it wasn't this is $61 billion issue that's really defining things. But even then, you've got Europe stepping up and saying, right, you can have X, Y, and Z. You've got coming online going forward, you have a sustainable provision of manufactured items such as artillery, ammunition, and mortar bombs going forward. So compared to where Ukraine was at the beginning of the war, with how much the West was doing then, which was, helmets, anyone, all that kind of stuff. Like we hadn't certainly ramped up production of artillery ammunition. The point we're at now is actually Ukraine's best point they have been. Yeah, they didn't succeed territorially with the counteroffensive, but look what they're doing in hammering Russian oil terminals in St. Petersburg and Kh-59 production facilities and Pantsir production facilities over the last couple of nights inside Russia. Look what they've done to Crimea. Look where the Black Sea Fleet is. Anyway, so now as the counteroffensive's failings are broadly discussed, the pendulum has swung back toward pessimism once again. The paucity of territorial gains, amplified in many ways by the lofty expectations heading into the campaign, led to yet another cycle of articles and headlines suggesting the dour inevitability of a Russian victory in the conflict. With Russian lines having failed to collapse, the popular talk is now fading Western support, Ukrainian political disunity, and behind-the-scenes pushes for Zelensky to accept the reality on the ground. Another round of articles and the necessity of negotiations have emerged, while pundits on the pro-Russian side have again claimed that Ukraine and the West are headed for certain defeat. But actually, again, that's not accurate. I think the Ukraine are in the best position they've been during this war right now. Not as in right now with what they've got now, but in terms of where they're going. Now, I'm assuming that aid from America will be released. And if that's released, then happy days. But actually, even without that, there are things that are in place that are making, from their own indigenous construction manufacturing point of view, and from what Europe are doing, from UK and other nations are doing, I think Ukraine really are in a much better position. I think your challenge is boots on the ground. It's just basically boots on the ground and American money. Boots on the ground and that package of American money is where we're at. But we shouldn't be fooled by this idea that it's all terrible, because we've been there before and it wasn't. We have been through now 3 troughs. We don't know the initial trough, and then that trough. Is this the 4th trough now of the Russians? Yeah, it starts on a negative, and that's 7 cycles. Yeah, this is the 4th negative trough. So each negative trough is less bad than the last one. So his conclusion. So what does he have to say? I guess, well, one of the key takeaways from reviewing these narrative cycles is that not all observers are equally reliable. While coverage in the media, and especially social media, has often made the outcome of this conflict appear inevitable, the analyst community has largely worked to avoid this. Both military and political analysts commentating on the war have consistently couched their insights with many layers of caveats, emphasizing that anything with as many inputs and moving parts as the 21st century's largest interstate conflict are exceedingly difficult to predict. This has led to much more robust record on their part, albeit one that's inherently less attractive in our contemporary global media environment than more bombastic predictions. Social media in particular is not well suited to such nuance. Long threads of analysis with many provisions and stipulations guiding their takeaways rarely, if ever, outperform similar posts promising grand victories or crushing defeats for one side. Given the nature of social media, this is unlikely to change anytime soon, but readers will hopefully grow more savvy. I think that's a really valuable observation there from Neil Hoyer there. Yes, so I think, do you know what? I'm just fairly positive at the moment, although I am also deeply worried about the lack of assistance from the US at the moment. And that really does worry me, and the lack of ammunition and supplies that the Ukrainians are suffering with right now. I think this will be solved. It certainly can easily be solved, as in all the US needs to do is say, yep, there you go. And you suddenly got those logistics lines lubricated. But yeah, let me know what you think about that up and down pattern of the war in these different phases, and whether you're in a positive position now or not. Right, I'm going to show you something that this is actually really common. I've seen this in British politics, and it's really interesting that this happens on all sides of the aisle, right? Every political party does this. This is Crimea, Sevastopol in 2014. Russia organizes a pro-Russian crowd to create a propaganda picture on TV that the majority of Crimeans support the annexation. The monument to the sunken ships from Sevastopol can be seen in the background. Now, this happens. I wish I did a quick search and I couldn't find it, but who was it? Was it a Boris Johnson one? I might have seen Boris Johnson have this, and I might have also seen Lib Dems do this in the UK, and also Rishi Sunak doing this. This is really common, which is you have a very you have your screen, your camera, your video camera that you're taking, and you just fill that with people. And as you're filming that, and you have the main politician in the middle talking, surrounded by people waving flags or with their rosettes or clapping or whatever, you think that represents a crowd that stretches for hundreds of people either side. But actually, the crowd is literally like 20 people. But you don't see that. You see these people and maybe something in the background, and you're piecing these things together, and you're like, wow, this person's really popular. And here's a really fabulous example of how this is done. So someone is filming the filming of this crowd, and you would think that crowd represents possibly hundreds, maybe even thousands of people if you don't get any panning at all. It's just there, and you just have this assumption that, oh my goodness, this person is popular, or this idea is popular, because look at all these flag waving people who are shouting to the high heavens. Well, actually, it's 20 people paid to be there, that may not even ideologically support the person that's talking, but they're earning a pretty penny, or it's just their aides and whatever. So this is a really common thing that we see in all countries, but I love to see that from the side there. Interesting. Right. Moving on to the next topic. So this is just a random thread from a random person, who knows, but I thought it was quite interesting. So to people who have no experience with spies, bit of James Bond here, I had a lot, but two stand out. My number two in the RFE Estonian service and my immediate boss in the research department. This is coming from a former, someone from Estonia who I think formerly worked in intelligence there. He says the latter was a shock when it came out. He had worked for the Czech KGB, the STB, but knew as only my superior. The first, though, I had known for almost a decade and considered not only a colleague, but also a friend and confidant. He told the best Soviet and anti-Soviet jokes and was a genuinely talented published writer. One day, in July 1991, the RFE director called me in at 7 a.m. Come in now, Mezelan has defected and is giving a press conference in Moscow in 2 hours. RFE at the time was one of the few places in the West with Russian TV. At the press conference in Moscow, the man I had thought a friend denounced me as an especially talented, well-trained and dangerous CIA officer. Of course, in usual fashion, also said how stupid, incompetent and useless we all were. If you think someone can't be a spy or informant because you get along so well, perhaps pick a different field. I mean, it's just a random anecdote from someone on Twitter here, but I imagine this is so common throughout history with spies and then double agents and triple agents, and you end up, we've watched this in many films, is like you had these people having relationships, maybe even like sexual or romantic relationships with people, and being someone else. We've seen this there's been a lot of issue with this in the police in the UK recently. There was a very famous case of a policeman who was undercover and went undercover in an environmental activist group. And this is going back maybe 20 years plus now. And then got involved romantically with someone and then led this double life and then came out later as being, this undercover police agent. And then it's turned into a big court case. That people are able to lead double lives, and you can get on really well, and you have that friendly relationship with people where you genuinely enjoy each other's company. But then at some point, one of you goes, "Oh, I'm defecting to the other side," and screw you. Yeah, people suck. But okay, the end of the story. He denounced me in the beginning of July 1991. Estonia declared independence on 20th of August of that year. On the 22nd of August, I was in Tallinn. A few days later, walking up the Dome Hill to the then Foreign Ministry, I saw a familiar shape and gate ahead. It sure looked like Mezelan, and speeding up, sure enough, it was him. I walked up to his side and asked, well, how do you feel being in independent Estonia after your performance? He turned away and kept walking. 3 months later, he was dead, having drunk himself to death. Estonia's prowess, or simply lack of Western kowtowing to appeasement when it comes to counter-espionage, was noticed already a decade ago. See this Foreign Affairs piece by Michael Weiss, someone we referred to quite a lot from 10 years ago. So interesting. There you go. So someone who had defected from Estonia, to Russia, and then from one to another, and then Estonia gets its proper independence, and then he's there, he meets him. 3 weeks later he's ill, or 3 months later he's dead, having drunk himself to death. But I'm not very good at lying. I don't like lying. It's not part of my DNA, and I'd find that just impossible to live that double life. Be horrible. In fact, I get really uncomfortable when I watch TV programs about people who do those long-term deceptions, like those people who, like my partner's watching the series recently of people who have men who have pretended to be X and Y, and then they're doing it to con money out of women and whatever. And there's this one about this fake guy that pretended to be in the CIA, American guy, conned the British woman and done it to many other people. I watch that and I get really uncomfortable. Like my mind just can't handle that deception. I hate it. And I get my like hatred of lying from my dad, who wouldn't lie to an insurance company. It's just one of these like really honest people. And I think I just get it from him. I mean, I'm not self-congratulating. I'm not responsible for how I developed, in that way, particularly. So I don't want to get on the whole free will debate again, but it's just one of those characteristics I have, and I'd find deception. I'd be a crap spy, basically. I'd be like, I'm lying. As soon as I said something, I'd just be like, why are you pausing and looking really uncomfortable? Okay, I'm a spy. Yeah, it wouldn't last long. Okay. Right. This is terrible. Spartan News says, this is Russia. This is the type of person Musk thinks Ukraine should negotiate with. This is why Butcher, Irpin, etc. happened. I truly hope this piece of garbage gets his wish and is part of the next meat wave to Avdiivka. Harsh words. Why is that so harsh? Well, my goodness, listen to what this guy says. Russian talks about his reasons for joining the Russian army. His motivation is to cut off the heads and abuse captured and civilian Ukrainians. And the main thing is that he is sure that he will not be imprisoned for this. Just incredible what this guy says. Now, bear in mind, this is just one person, anecdote, etc., etc. But wow. So he says, I'm still thinking about signing a contract. So that'd be to join the army. I'm thinking about doing it in the upcoming days. First of all, it's very cool to serve the country. Okay, he's proud nationalist. Second of all, you can peacefully kill people without going to jail. Okay, now he's gone dark. So that's why you want to join the army, so you can just kill people without going to jail. Like, not bad guys, just it's the idea of killing people that gives him joy. You fight for Russia, at the end of the day, you won't be punished for that. Okay, and there's another cool thing. Oh, what's that? You can catch the Nazis. Okay, fair enough. Here, a bit of propaganda. Then you can torture them. All right, now you've gone south. You can put them on their knees, and then you cut their things off. Censored. Okay, it's very good. Brilliant, because that's what I think of doing all the time. I love thinking of cutting off people's crown jewels. It gives you confidence and pride. Goodness me. Like when I talk to my children about, do this to give you confidence. You know what? You if you do this, I really like you to be proud of your work, the homework you do. You need to have pride in your work. What I don't do is like, so you need to do that neatly, and you think about the organisation. You need to think, is this the best I could do? What I don't tell them is, I'll tell you what, I'll give you pride in what you do. Cutting the testicles off of another human being. That'll give you pride. Gee whiz. And you even get $2,200 for that. So, bonus. Not only doing what you love, but getting paid for it. So, you'd be ready to go there, says the interviewer. I'm ready for this experience. I'd like to get money for killing people. And it's not bad what I will do. Good must overcome evil. It's like this. It appears to have this clear sense of good and evil. Good must overcome evil, yeah? But then smashing together morality in a most egregious manner, to then top it off with, because of course good must overcome evil. I agree to do this. Oh, some people suck. And talking about things sucking bad, this is fascinating too. So this is a Chinese fighter who joined the Russian army, and not fascinating, not in a good way, who joined the Russian army to kill Ukrainians for money. He's a bit upset at the conditions. This is a guy who, at the beginning, and I'll put the sound on for this. So here's a Chinese guy that signed up voluntarily to fight for the Russians, right? So must have some kind of ideological alignment with them. And he's obviously taught his Russian compatriot or comrades here, the Chinese that they're just repeating to him, and he's joined up. Everyone's really happy. There's a load of like high morale, and he's really G'd up for this. And he's shouting to so those who listen. He said, "Everyone, listen to my instructions. Hello, comrades." And they say, "Hello, comrades. Thank you for your hard work." And they say, comrades, thank you for your hard work. Use me in the first battle. Use me in the first battle. They say, if you use me, you will win. If you use me, you will win. Okay. And he's laughing, and it's all great. And then he says, we are leaving. The big army has set off. So this is now further forward in time, just before he leaves to go. And now this is him now, right? This is him, I don't know how long later. And this is what he says. So he says, hello, and his voice is so. Just to let you know, I think he's got an issue with his throat. He's got a medical condition that he's developed, and I think it is with his throat.
我现在在乌克兰，战场没有把我击倒。
And he says, and I'll read it to you from now. He says, "Hello, I'm in Ukraine. The battlefield did not knock me down. The pain knocks me down. I have a bad cold. My throat is all ulcerated. My joints are very painful. There is no medical treatment here. Doctor prescribed the simplest medicine and electrocardiogram. I then said, I have no problem. I said, I need to be healthy. I want to quit. I walked for nearly 40 minutes. He says, heavily snowing. I just found some cell phone signal. Only then can I send you information. I contacted the Chinese embassy in Russia. They said it was a personal act. I'm begging all netizens now, so people on the internet now, please help me. Chinese netizens, contact the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China. I need to terminate the contract. I need to go back to China to recuperate. My heart problem is severe. I can no longer take care of myself. There is no medical treatment here. I will die. I'm going to die here. I feel very uncomfortable. I've been like this for a week. Please help me contact the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He says, yeah. Thanks to everyone. I want to go back to China. I want to terminate the contract. No medicine. No hospital. I'm going to die here. Nobody takes care of me. No treatment. So repeating all these same things, he's absolutely at his wit's end. And he thinks he's going to die. So a couple of things here. One, conditions are bad. Conditions suck. Why you would volunteer to join the Russian army? Goodness me. I mean, it just must show that before that, he must have been in some information bubble where he's only looking at pro-Russian propaganda that paints it all as wonderful without seeing the reality on the front line that we all see when we see Ukrainian propaganda back about Russian conditions, where it's actually not Ukrainian propaganda. There are all these videos coming out from Russians about their complaints of the conditions and so forth. But if you only sit on one side, you don't see the other. And we have a problem. I have a problem of only seeing a certain set bunch of things that will skew towards pro-Ukraine. So there will be issues for Ukrainian soldiers that we don't always get to see about. We know it's there. I mean, I'm cognizant that there are conditions that are terrible for Ukrainians. Ukrainians are dying, and there are certain areas of the battlefield that are truly horrific. But yeah, to sign up for the Russian armed forces voluntarily, and leaving whatever life you had behind, it just seems wholly bizarre to me. And it's no surprise he then turns around, in those snowy conditions, saying, I want to go home. This is terrible. I am going to die. Yeah, conditions are bad. But also, the other thing I wanted to discuss, and I don't really know, I haven't really looked into this, but effectively you signed a contract. So legally, you've got to do that, right? I'd be interested to see what the contract entails, what the fine print is, see a lawyer look over that to see whether the Russians have to promise him, medical aid and support. What's the Russian side of the bargain with that contract? Because are they invalidating the contract? Because at the end of the day, if he signed that contract, he can't, legally speaking, he can't just up and leave. Of course, my goodness, I would. Yeah, that's a bit of an issue. If you're going to sign yourself into a contract to fight for the Russian army, then that's what you're going to expect, unfortunately, matey. Yes, and I actually showed you this before, so that's something I was going to show you in this video, but I actually showed you in a live stream, which is a letter someone sent. This is when Hussein sent to his senator, I think, and no, congressman. But you can check that out if you want to. It's on the screen now, and I'll make it a little bit bigger if you want to get something like this together to write to your own, senator or congressman or politician wherever you live. This is particular to someone who was a Republican affiliated voter, but I'm sure similar content can be used no matter what side of the aisle you are on and what country you live in. But there you go. That's Wayne Hussein writing a letter, and there are many people that have done that. I've got some on Discord that I must share with people as well. Anyway, that's enough from me. In one of my next extras, I'm going to have a look at hacking. This is another one of these really quality Euromaidan articles. We had one on snipers some time back. This is another huge article about hacking, and I just want to look into that because I think it is really important, and there's a lot of work that's taking place behind the scenes in the dark rooms around Ukraine, probably outside Ukraine, as they're fighting in the information spaces and also fighting a different kind of war, a cyber war, taking down elements of the Russian infrastructure so they can't prosecute the war. And of course, the Russians are doing that to the Ukrainians as well. So save that for next time. Anyway, I really appreciate all of your support. It's incredibly valuable to me. I'm just going to give some props to certain people. So thanks to these people on Buy Me a Coffee who've been really kind. Simon Zed, just really generous. Stainsy Noble, Willie Cassidy, David Bowden, Julian Rossiter, Diana Cusack, John P. As ever, really, really generous. And another Simon too, and Stephen Bendal. Really, really appreciate your support. And some overdue thanks to people on PayPal, and this includes to supporters of the charity event. But I just want to say thanks to Angelo Vecchio, Carl Poole, Peter Kluken, Frederick Lane, Matt Kirk, Mark Daniels, incredibly generous, Nico Latouille, Eloise Lowe, Mark Bizque, as ever, Andre Urdovic, Davin. Andre is such a great supporter as well. Davin Overland too, just really generous. Michael Ward, as ever, Deborah McClung, Yoel Prinslin. I mean, these are going back some time. Warren Wasson, VJ Pomeroy, just really generous. Nicola Owen, Stephen Davis, Asa Carson, again Michael Ward, Wendy Wright, David Austin, and Matt Frame, and a lot of that will be towards the fundraising we did. So it's really generous. Thank you, guys. Anyway, that's enough from me. Take care, everybody, and speak soon.